David Cicilline of Rhode Island. He's a member of the House Judiciary Committee. He has been very critical of President Trump's behavior as described in the Mueller report. Congressman, let me just start with some apparently breaking news here. We mentioned that subpoena from your committee's chairman there, PBS, Michelle Cinder, who's sometimes on the airwaves here as well. She is reporting that the DOJ is going to respond to that subpoena, to that request, calling it premature and unnecessary, that request from your committee's chairman. What's your reaction to that?
Well, it's timely and necessary. Look, the Judiciary Committee has responsibility to do oversight. We need to see the full contents of the report. The best and most recent example was when Ken Stark completed his report. He turned over the report in its entirety to the Judiciary Committee. He sought permission for the court for the grand jury testimony without even being asked by Congress, and then delivered the report with 17 boxes of materials, the supporting evidence. That's the practice we should be following. The Judiciary Committee has the right to see the full contents of the report in order to do our oversight responsibly. The stuff that's classified, we can see in a SCIF in a classified setting. We do that all the time, but it's long past time for members of Congress to see that full report.
And I should mention, too, we've just confirmed, too, I mentioned that response from the Department of Justice, again, calling the subpoena premature and unnecessary. Let me ask you about the question of the hour now within your party, certainly, that question of impeachment. Elizabeth Warren, candidate for president, says it is time for the House, for Democrats in the House, to begin impeachment proceedings. Do you agree with her?
Well, I'll tell you what, because I reviewed the entire report. I spent 5 hours yesterday reading every single page of the report and the appendices. I encourage people to do that. It is breathtaking to hear and see in print the conduct of the Trump campaign and the Trump administration. There is no question that in Volume 2, the special counsel sets out 10 instances of obstruction of justice committed by the president, and comes to the conclusion that because of the legal memorandum, he would not make a traditional analysis. That legal memorandum that said a sitting president can't be indicted. And then he basically reminds Congress that this is our responsibility in the closing paragraphs of that report. So we have additional work to do. We've now subpoenaed the full report, all of the supporting documents. We need to hear from Mr. Barr and Mr. Mueller. But this is very serious. You know, what makes me sad is this discussion about Democrats versus Republicans and how we're viewing it. Every American, whether you're a Republican, Democrat, or Independent, should be horrified that the Russians interfered, attacked our democracy. It was welcomed by a presidential campaign who benefited from it. Then they lied about it in an attempt to cover it up. This strikes at the very heart of our democracy, and we have to approach this judiciously and soberly. This is very serious.
But I just want to be, I hear you, so I'm asking. Is part of that approach impeachment proceedings? Elizabeth Warren says, I don't think now's the time to begin. Yes or no? Do you agree with that?
I think there is no question that impeachment must be on the table. There's a process. You know, Elizabeth Warren, I respect her tremendously, but she's not on the House Judiciary Committee. We actually have to do the work. We are still in the evidence gathering phase. We want to make sure we have everything we need. But there is no question that this is very serious, and the prospect of impeachment has significantly increased based on the contents of the Mueller report. And we can only imagine what's in the unredacted portions of this report. But we have to approach this soberly. But I think it is very important that the House recognize that this is a moment where not only the country is watching, but the world is watching. We're seeing rule of law being undermined, free press being undermined, authoritarian governments rising. This is a moment where America has to show by our example that the Constitution matters, the rule of law matters, and no one is above the law. And we need to move forward and finish the collection of our evidence and take whatever action is appropriate, including impeachment if it's compelled. It's, you know, my view is pretty clear. I think there's ample evidence in this to warrant removal of the president. It's not my judgment alone. There's a process and a committee and a set of hearings that will have to happen. But I think everyone should read that report. It is sobering and stunning and deeply disturbing.
I want to follow that then, just because what you said at the end there. You said you think there's ample evidence for the removal of the president. Impeachment
well, we know for sure.
We know that impeachment proceedings, you would have hearings. That's an you have an investigation. You'd have hearings. So it sounds like you are calling for that process, are you not?
No, look, we know for a fact obstruction of justice is an impeachable offense. There's no question about that. That is what's set forth in the special counsel's report. We have additional evidence to collect, but I think it is quite clear that the president committed offenses which would or constitute impeachable offenses. And obviously the committee has a process that we have to follow to both finish the collection of evidence, to conduct hearings, to do that, make sure that everyone considers that the right judgment. My own view of it is, having read the entire report, is that there is sufficient evidence in that to constitute impeachable offenses, and that option remains on the table. But it's important that we do our work, and I know people are anxious for us to move quickly. We just got this report. It's invited lots more questions. We need to collect the balance of the evidence to make sure that we're doing this properly. The country has to have confidence that this is not being done for political reasons. It's very important for people to understand we should never do impeachment for a political reason alone, and we should never refuse to do impeachment if the facts warrant it for a political reason. And I think we just have to be careful that we make that clear as we do our work in the Congress.
Well, what has the temperature changed, not just with you, but with Democratic leaders? Because I just saw yesterday Steny Hoyer, number 2 Democrat in the House, as the Mueller report's coming out in the middle of the day, he said it was not the time to do impeachment. And 2 hours later, a new statement that was a lot more ambivalent on the question, it seemed.
Well, I think, anyone who has read the Mueller report and is fair-minded and does it with kind of an open mind has to conclude at the conclusion of their reading that this is very serious, that there is evidence of impeachable offenses. We know obstruction of justice is an impeachable offense. And so I think after reading that, everyone would have to recognize that impeachment remains on the table. And although there's a process the committee needs to follow to conclude, our own fact gathering, evidence gathering, so that we can see all the contents of the report and all the supporting materials. But no one who's read this report from cover to cover would leave that reading and not think that this is a very serious body of work that raises questions about obstruction of justice, the convergence of a Russian adversary in a presidential campaign, kind of convergence of interests, that there was significant help from the Russians to elect Donald Trump as president, that the president tried to impede this investigation by firing people, encouraging people to lie, lying himself. Those are very, very serious offenses, and many of them we know are impeachable offenses. So we're going to go through the work that we need to do to continue to gather information, and I expect that when that evidence gathering is complete, we'll make a judgment on how to proceed. I know my own view, and my colleagues will have an opportunity to weigh in on that as well.
Very quickly, that evidence gathering, roughly, how long do you think? What's the timetable for that?
Well, it depends. It would be very helpful if the Attorney General cooperated. He should have already given us the report and the supporting materials. We could move through this very quickly with the cooperation of the administration and the Attorney General. And I hope he understands the urgency, that Congress understands the urgency of moving forward. And it really will be determined in large part on how quickly Mr. Barr complies with our requests.
All right, Congressman David Cicilline from Rhode Island, thank you for joining us.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.